Hi, Zarina.
Hi, Alex.
Thank you so much for having us in Glasgow. Can you tell us a little bit about these communities that you work with?
So this is we're here today at the West End of Glasgow, and this centre is known as Albeit Society. The Albeit Society has been up and running since 1991. It's a very voluntary organisation. So when I say voluntary organisation, it's led purely by volunteers. They sometimes get funding to have staff, but most of the time the board are all volunteers and the staff are all volunteers. So it's an amazing organisation that does a lot of community work with the community of the Middle East mainly. So mostly Arab speaking countries. So that would include places like Lebanon, Jordan, Yemen, Kuwait, Egypt, Iraq, the Kurds that are from Iraq, Syria, Turkey, Syrians, Palestinians, a lot of the Gulf and the Middle Eastern countries, and this is a society for them. And it was set up in 1991, as I said, because there wasn't a lot of Middle Eastern communities at that time. This was to like more of a social gathering and helping place, really, when it was set up. It then became about keeping connections to their culture and to their religion. So it is an Islamic centre as well. So it is a religious centre, but they do community work.
And would you please share with us your background and how you started working with sustainability?
So my name's Zarina Ahmad, and my journey started off with midlife assessment. Right, so not a midlife crisis, but a midlife assessment. And at that time, I was looking at my life, lots of different parts of my life, my career, my marriage, and just where I was. And I was like thinking, okay, I'm in a place where I'm not happy. What was I passionate about? It was me thinking back to my childhood and thinking, right, when I was young, what did I want to do? And the two things that I was really interested in one was people and behaviour, and the other one was the environment. I've always been passionate about the environment since I remember. I was one of these children that played outdoors, was outdoors all the time, talked to plants, didn't eat meat from a young age, from like 2 or 3 as soon as I was conscious. So the two things I was passionate about. And I did my degree in psychology. I didn't end up working as a psychologist because I got married, had kids. You had to earn a living from elsewhere, and it was So it was at that point when I thought, well, what do I want to do? So I did a bit of weighing up between psychology and the environment sector, and the environmental sector won. So that was how I ended up in the environmental field, and I worked for a community trust in East Asia, a very rural area, and where there's lots of farmers. And I remember one of my first projects there was to connect the farmers to the council and get local food into their like the schools, into the NHS there. So it was about linking local food with council, so getting it into their procurement system. So that's how I started my environmental work. However, it moved from just being environmental to looking at like racial justice and social justice. I worked in a very deprived area, so there was this whole element and factor about thinking about, well, how do we connect like climate change, environmental sustainability with other social justice when there's people that are on a daily basis just struggling to think about how are they going to meet their daily needs. So that was one area that was very much at the focus, and that was where I was working. But then my own personal story was that I encountered some very racist incidents in the environmental sector at the time that made me actually start questioning about how white the environmental sector was. So then I joined a race equality organisation, which then worked with Scottish Government to help implement the Climate Challenge Fund. The Climate Challenge Fund was around at that time for about 3 years. It had just recently had a review. So we were able to speak to Scottish Government and have a look at the data that was collected from the evaluation. And there was this huge gap of where that fund was going. So it wasn't going to very many ethnic minority organisations. It actually only gone to 2/3 organisations in a period of 3 to 4 years.
Do you know what the barriers were?
So this is interesting because I don't see them as barriers, right? So this is the terms that were used and used at that time by many, including Scottish Government, but these communities are hard to reach, they have other priorities, so these were the barriers, right? Now, when I went in, I would say I was set up in a way to that this was going to be a hard sell. So not only is this a community that's in a that's like they've got other priorities, but they don't have the language, they're not educated in climate change and sustainability. All of these additional, like people would say barriers, as you would have said, barriers, right? And it was the easiest job I've ever had. So I've loved doing this work because I learned so much from other people. Yes, the language and the terminology isn't there, and it isn't there for most people unless you're working in the field, but the understanding of climate change was there. People understood, because most of the people that I was working with were people that had connections to other parts of the world. So like, for instance, like this community is from the Middle East, right? So like Kuwait, Iraq have been the hottest country, on the world for the last 3 years. Iraq's been hitting 55 degrees. Kuwait was 54 degrees last year. So these, the people that I was working with understood the impact, the reality of climate change and how it's impacting lives, how it's impacting the earth, how it's impacting habitat. So there was all these connections to lots of different parts of the world. And that was a bit of an eye-opener because it was real for them. It wasn't something that was abstract. So when I was working in East Asia, it was always about like carbon emissions. And it was trying to imagine, well, what does carbon gas look like? So when we talk about tons of carbon gas, we were creating it to things like the sizes of double-decker buses or a football field or something like this, right? Which is still quite abstract. So the impact was abstract, the understanding of climate change was abstract, but when I was working with these communities, climate change was real for them, and there was an urgency. So that was one thing that was easy to have a conversation about, easy in the sense that it wasn't a hard sell for me. And the second thing was religion. So most of the communities I worked with, a lot of them were communities of interest, and they came together either around their language, their culture, or their faith. And faith was another opening for me to then again have conversations that sometimes for some people can be quite difficult, but then when you bring faith into it, it was like, oh right, we get it, we understand, so we have a responsibility to look after the planet. So this is so a lot of scriptures in lots of different faiths have very similar or parallel things about looking after the environment. So it was an easy sell. It was easy for me, and it was really interesting. And the topics and the debates that came up, connection to land, which is also something, connection to land, connection to food, where food comes from, is something else that for many of these communities, they're much closer to that. So they understand, even the meat, they're closer to having meat that is slaughtered in front of you. So, that reality of where meat comes from is much more prevalent. And I suppose for people, it's not much more, it's not removed, it's not somewhere else, it's not happening somewhere else. And we have to look after the animals. We have to think about their welfare. So even growing is everybody, a lot of people, I remember speaking to a lady actually in this society once, and she was telling me about being close to the land. She goes, she misses it because, and she sat down and she went like this, and she went, I miss touching my land, I miss touching my soil, I miss touching the earth. And it was just so touching at that point, because it made me realize that actually when we sit here in a city, it's so hard to be connected to nature. And a lot of people, because of where they came from, the areas that they come from aren't so built up, and they have that access to land, or just culturally they're much more connected to land.
Zarina, could you please provide some examples of the projects that you've been doing on the sustainability theme with these communities?
Right, so many of these communities, just to give you an idea of the type of things that a lot of these communities did and that I helped set up, they worked around 4 themes, right? So there was energy, energy efficiency, so energy for building, energy in homes, so thinking about energy efficiency. There was transport, so active transport, thinking about using car less, car sharing, getting people on bikes, and walking. And then there was food, thinking about where our food comes from, air miles, food waste. And then there was waste which includes like recycling, upcycling. So from this, lots of projects were set up around the whole of Scotland. So what was interesting about doing all this work on sustainability for me was that COP26 happened in Glasgow, so which was wonderful for Glasgow, and it was great for all the projects that were working here. Now, a lot of my work was probably a lot more strategic, but I didn't really want to be involved at that strategic level. I really wanted to showcase some of the wonderful work that these projects were doing. So what I had been running with, I'd been running a climate leadership course through these organizations. And through this climate leadership course, what was interesting was that at the end of the course, and I'd done it with young people, done it with women, did it with like, different organizations. But what was always interesting was that people came up with wonderful ideas. Now, COP26 was supposed to happen just before COVID, right? And then COVID happened. So we were in a pandemic and lockdown, right? So everything that I do, which is very interactive, outdoorsy, we go outdoors, we have picnics, we go for walks, we go to the countryside, and we do a lot of that leadership work through the outdoors work as well. Because going back to what I was telling you earlier about being connected to the land became really important to me, because what I understood from the communities I was working from, because a lot of them were like either migrant communities, diaspora communities, who still had, when they talked about their homeland, they had this connection to the land. But when they talked about Scotland, they didn't have that connection. And I wanted them to have that connection. So I didn't want them just to be thinking about the road that they live in or the street that they live in, but actually of what's beyond that. So when it came to COP26 and the pandemic, everything went online. It went on Zoom. And it was like, I was at this point where I was like, oh, how am I going to do this leadership course, which is so interactive, sitting behind a camera, right? And anyway, went ahead. I was working with an organization called Aniqah Ali, which is a wonderful women's organization. And I did the climate leadership course through Zoom. And some of the women on that Zoom call had their cameras off for most of the time. So it was a 6-week course. So it was once a week for 6 weeks or 8 weeks. I think we extended to 8 weeks. And it was interesting because at the end of it, normally they have to present back to the room, in a physical room, in a physical way, and they always have a choice of how they want to present back. So they can either sing, they can do like an interview type of recording, they can do a poster presentation. So it was the usual methods of presenting back. But because it was on Zoom, that wasn't possible. So everybody was going to have to present back in the same way. So what I said to each of the women was, if you weren't on Zoom, right? So let's just say, hypothetically, how would you have liked to have showcased the climate issue that you're interested in, if you weren't behind a camera, if you weren't on Zoom, right? And they all came up with these wonderful, artistic, creative ideas. So for instance, one person spoke about making a dress and talking about textiles. One person spoke about, she was like a seamstress. Somebody else said, well, she likes jewelry making, so she would like to, do something with jewelry making. And somebody else said that they like making a movie, so she wants to create a short film. And, and somebody said podcasts. And, so they all came up with different ideas, but it was all on paper. So it was a flat 2D idea, right? And after that, then it's like, bye-bye, I'll see you, whenever we'll do something else together. But it just left this feeling in me that I can't leave those ideas. They're there. So I went to a funder and I got some funding. And normally, because I work with organizations and I worked for an organization as well, I didn't want the organization to get the funds for some reason. It was very much, I want these, whoever was going to be part of the Climate Sisters, at that point I didn't know exactly who was going to be part of the Climate Sisters, was then I want them to be resourced. because it's their ideas and I want their voices at COP26. It's not about an organisation being at COP26. They get the opportunities. But these women that are even shy to talk in front of a camera, what would it be like for them to be at COP26? And they had and what they had to say about climate change and sustainability was really important. It was really important to them, and it was a really important message. So it's like, well, they have to be there. They have to be there somehow. So I was lucky I got funding. And I got funding from the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust, who actually, they trusted me to deliver what I said I was going to deliver. So it meant giving money to individuals. So usually funders don't give money to individuals, they give money to organisations. So that was a big turnaround. And then it was, well, who's going to hold the money? Because it can't go into private account. So it can't go into personal account. So I had to go to an organisation. So I did a lot of work at that time also with Women's Environmental Network. So what they did was they said they'll hold the money, but they weren't taking any admin costs or anything. So they just held the money for me. And then I was able to deliver the Climate Sisters project with each of these 12 individual people. And then it gained interest. So I had some help and support from Edinburgh University. So they came in and they created a short video about the process and about these women that were going through this journey to be at COP26. And then also Glasgow University actually came in as well. And again, I had this relationship with Glasgow University, and somebody rang me up and said, oh, we're interested in what's happening at COP. Zarina, tell us what's happening at COP. Are there any interesting projects? Because I work with different organisations. So, is there anybody doing anything interesting? So I was telling them about all the different organisations. And I said, but by the way, there is this project that's going to be called the Climate Sisters. And it's about these 12 women that are going to create something artistic, but I can't help them. Right? Yeah, I got the idea. I know how to support them, but on each of their 12 projects individually, I'm not a movie maker. I'm not somebody who can draw. It's like, how do I help and support them individually? So that's where Glasgow University came in. They said, well, we can provide a student mentor who can then, from the art school, and match them up. So they all got a mentor from the university then to help them, just to it could be, for some people it could have just been sounding off ideas, be a soundboard. For others it could have been much more hands-on help and support. So that's how that project came about. But it wasn't, and it was from the climate leadership, but I opened it up to, because I worked with different organisations, so I opened up the Climate Sisters to other women from different organisations. So there was women from this centre, Ala Bates Centre, and then from the organisation Gilded Lily, and then there was a couple of independent women that came about.
Can you please share a little bit more about some of those 12 projects, how they were connected to the topic of sustainability, and maybe the long-term impact?
So I'll start off with, I'll go through each of them. So Aniqah did podcasts. So Aniqah was a young person at the time, and still is a young person. But Aniqah was very much about creating space for people like herself to have their voices heard. She wasn't very confident about speaking out on issues of racial justice, gender justice. So for her, it was that connection of climate justice with different social justice issues. And what she did was then speak to women from Kenya, from Pakistan, from India, and from the UK, but then getting real life stories in her podcast. So that was how, so she wanted to connect the real life stories to hear what's happening on the ground, but also in terms of connecting the other social justice, the intersectionality. So she was very much about intersectionality. So Aniqah now, from that project, is she's working for a youth project called Princess Trust. And even within Princess Trust, she actually helps organisations and even schools. She works a lot with schools to get children outdoors and do outdoor activities. So a lot of her funds go to outdoor activities. So and she does the residentials with young people, and she is still doing some podcasts and trying to get young voices and young activists. So she's very much I would say a young activist in the making. So that's Aniqah. And then Simran, who was also the youngest person at the time. She was 18 at the time, and Simran was an artist. She made this beautiful collage. It was absolutely amazing. She had she had 16 boards that were probably that size. I'm not very good with dimensions, but this size, if you can imagine what this size is, and she had 16 of them. Then on each board, what she'd done was she had used like recycled materials, mostly plastic, and it was mostly milk bottles that she'd used. But she'd done, so if you looked at each board separately, you wouldn't have seen a picture. But once you put the 16 the boards together, she made this wonderful picture, and it was of a farmer holding a scythe, which is like a long blade to chop either wheat or corn. And she had done that, and it was about the plight of farmers in India who are fighting against genetically modified seeds, and the rights and access to the produce that they grow. So she was, because her own background was from India, from the Punjab of India, this was something that was really, she was really passionate about and wanted to bring that to the forefront. And she was saying that, these farmers have knowledge about seeds and know how to grow seeds that are resilient to the impacts of climate, but yet they've been forced to use genetically modified seeds. So that was her, and she was 18 years old, and it was just absolutely fantastic, her mural. Then there was Sajda. Sajda was a very quiet person who would have said that she had no knowledge of any sustainability or climate change. But actually, when we started to work on the project, and she wanted to make a dress, so she was somebody who was a dressmaker and seamstress, but not by profession. It was only her hobby, but she is absolutely fantastic. What she did was she used old denim and tartan, and she made this beautiful ball gown, absolutely amazing ball gown. It was like this, and it was just like so long, and I remember fighting with somebody trying to see who's going to wear it and who's going to model it, and we've been trying to get the First Minister at the time, which was Nicola Sturgeon, to showcase and model it, but we didn't manage that. But it was beautiful. But what Saj did, she had her own discovery journey about sustainability and textile. So and part of that project was for people to learn themselves and find out, but also learn from each other. So there was a lot of knowledge sharing going on. So as Saj was learning about the impacts of the textile industry on the environment, like the dyes that go into the rivers and pollute the rivers, how much cotton uses up water and resources, she was sharing that with the other women as well. So we were all learning from each other the whole time. So again, like with Aniqah's podcast, when we were listening to the podcast and the stories of what was happening in Kenya, so it was that cross-pollination of knowledge, which was really, for me, which was something that I didn't expect to happen. And again, it was like, and I'm just thinking now back to like, and it was a passion when people were telling me, because it was something that they'd learned and they wanted to share it, and it was something new, and then they were like, oh, did you know this, did you know that, and I've just found this out. And it was like, so it was done very informally, but yet we all took on that knowledge. So she was very much about like the textile industry and the impact the textile industry has on the environment. And then there was Susy. Now Susy had just, when she did the Climate Sisters, when she had done the climate leadership course, she had just arrived in the country. So she'd come from El Salvador, and she had probably about, her vocabulary would have been probably about, she would have been able to say maybe about 6 sentences at the time. Right, and Susy now is very fluent in English, but Susy was, she was probably an environmentalist at heart, and she was concerned about plastic pollution in the ocean. So she was telling us stories about that when she goes to the beaches of El Salvador. She does a cleanup in El Salvador. She used to do a cleanup, and she used to find plastic that didn't even come from El Salvador. She said it was traveling from other parts of the world and landing on El Salvador, and so she was really passionate about this and was getting really frustrated and annoyed about this situation. But she was also very creative. So what she did was then she wanted to make jewelry. So she was a jewelry maker as well. So she created jewelry out of old plastics and CDs. And so she created jewelry like earrings, necklaces, bracelets. But she also made these amazing face masks. So she made these face masks out of milk bottle cartons. So these milk cartons that we have like these jugs, these plastic jugs that just get wasted all the time. But she created them into these wonderful face masks that were absolutely fantastic. So that was Susy. And Susy now, so Susy now is doing so many things. She's a singer now, and she sings. She's a hairdresser now. She still does jewelry making. She doesn't want to sell her jewelry in terms of like, she doesn't want it to be commercial. She wants to like show other people how to make jewelry. So for her, it's also about sharing that knowledge and that skill set with other women. So that's Susy. Amanda. So Amanda was born and brought up in the west of Scotland, around Glasgow, and so always lived around Glasgow. Amanda was also, she was in her early 20s at the time, and Amanda was a singer-songwriter, right? And she was at university, learning about musical technicians and music, but she was also working on a community project. So for her, working with underrepresented communities or deprived communities was also, again, that social justice element was really important to Amanda. Amanda was also on her own journey in terms of her own personal journey about being an environmentalist and about learning about sustainability. So she was quite passionate about finding out more and having her voice. But again, was very shy and not very confident. So Amanda had just become a vegan at the time as well, and so she was like like looking at different places of where she belongs, right? But because Amanda was a singer-songwriter, she actually wrote a song for COP, and it was wonderful. It was absolutely fantastic song. It really made you like people say, like, brings up goosebumps on your arms. It really did. But what was interesting about Amanda's song was that she actually, in her video, because she'd never done a music video, so she'd been singing, does local singing, like at pubs and things like this, and did gigs and things like that. So she wasn't like a big singer, and she didn't see herself as a big singer, but she's got an amazing voice. But she hadn't done a music video, so this was the new thing for her, was a new element. But so she did a music video of like looking at like the outdoors. So she went further into the countryside, connected it with the city, and talked about like the waste, the pollution. But then she also used the other climate sisters in her video, which was really nice to tell her story. So she just talked about, like, a music video is about like waste and pollution and about looking after the land, and that's what her music video is about. So that was Amanda. Then we had a double act. Then we had Heather and Menesia. Menesia is from, I can't remember where Menesia is from. Menesia is from Africa, and I can't remember the country she's from. It's just totally gone out of my head. But Menesia had been here for a few years, but again, she came in as an asylum seeker refugee. And but what Menesia had found here was that there was this lack of access to land for growing. There was no growing spaces. So she said, well, from the country where she came from, there was always space. Even if you had a small house, even if you were poor, there was always land to grow. So that there was always fresh food, and that she couldn't understand why there wasn't land here for growing. Her head was just like, why is everything concrete? Where's the land, right? So, and Menesia is a nurse, so she was really, really passionate about finding growing spaces. So Heather, who's local from Govan, and has always lived in Govan, and she was very interested and passionate about growing. So, and again, Heather doesn't have growing space in where she lives, but she has access to a community garden. So she said, oh, well, why don't we think about something that we can do together? Right, and what would it look like? So they ended up looking at old pallets and creating a mobile garden. So they put two old pallets together, fixed them together, and put them on wheels. So it became this mobile garden, and there's like shelves and that, so you can put this mobile garden anywhere you want, even if you've got a small flat, because it comes, it folds together. And when we were showcasing this at the Glasgow Science Centre, the CEO of Glasgow Science Centre said, actually, I'm going to have a conversation with B&Q, because I think this could become a commercial project. And I think both Heather and Menesia are quite keen to take that forward. So that's something that, because they've got the protocol. So when they were making it, we even said to them, when you're making it, make sure that you've got the step-by-step stages of how you put it together as well. So that's something that they want to probably take forward. Heather is working for Gilded Lily now, and at the time Heather wasn't working for Gilded Lily. Now she works for Community Project, she works for Gilded Lily. Menesia has moved down south, so she's doing her nursing down south. But they're still connected very much to the Climate Sisters project. And then we've got Mirai. Mirai is from Cyprus, so she's Turkish Cypriot, and she came here. She came to Glasgow many years ago, but she came as a student, so she came here to study. And she's a drama filmmaker student, and that's what Mirai does. And Mirai, my connection with Mirai was that Mirai worked on a CCF project, Climate Challenge funded project that I'd set up, and so I'd got to know Mirai from that project. But Mirai wasn't doing filmmaking at the time. She was just delivering, like, I think it was an upcycling project or something like this. But when she came to the Climate Sisters, she wanted to join the Climate Sisters. She wanted to make a short film, and she wanted to document the peatlands and how the peatlands can be carbon sink, but if you're destroying the peatlands, you release the carbon. So she was teaching everybody else in the group about the peatlands and telling them all about the peatlands, and some people like, well, we don't even know what peatlands were, and so she was explaining that. But what she did with the movie is that she made it into like a very like sci-fi movie. So it was really interesting because it was like had this like eeriness to it, which kind of makes you like think about, well, what would the world be like? You know how sci-fi means, I don't know, they always make me think like that. Sci-fi is like, cause like a parallel universe. So Marai's movie, and then what the other thing that Mirai did, and which was something that I was trying to encourage with all the other women as well, because for a lot of them, English was not their first language. English was their second language, or even third language for some people. And some people weren't confident in speaking in English. So we said, well, use your first language wherever you want to. And then it's up to us, like myself or Edinburgh University or Glasgow University, wherever it's going to be showcased, is to help with translators. So Mirai, even though she's very fluent in English, but she still wanted to be authentic to her roots. So she made the movie in Turkish, and then had subtitles in it. Right, so that was really nice. And then Nahawand, who's from Al Albeit Society, and she was working on the climate change project here, and she was she liked to do upcycling and recycling. That was her passion, and she was always about upcycling and recycling. So I thought she was actually going to do something more on the lines of like Susy with like jewelry making, or like a Saj making a dress, and I probably totally underestimated Nahawand, right? Because what she did was she made a statue, and she made this wonderful statue of it was like a tree, and it was like a tree. Then it was like the branches of the trees were holding like a baby, but the baby was the world, and it was just so beautiful. It was really, and it was quite a big one, so it was probably about 4 foot, 5 foot statue, and she was making it in the center here, and I remember the center saying, oh my god, it's like, such a mess while she was making it. But she was using old like twigs and tree, branches and bark and any material that she could find to make this beautiful statue. And then for Nahawand, what made her project like her piece, her creative piece, was the music. She really was adding, she really wanted to have music behind it. So the statue actually sits on a rotating disc, and it rotates around, and then she plays music behind it, and that music is like Iraqi music for her. So she really wanted that, like, again, to have some kind of connection to our culture. But then for her, that was all about deforestation. So she was connecting it to the story of deforestation and what's going to happen to the planet. And she's seen a lot of deforestation happen in Iraq, and she was saying, like, and whether the trees are there to protect us, the environment. They provide us with shade, they provide us with water and food and shelter, and then connecting it to Islam as well, because in Islam and religion there's a lot about trees and planting trees and how important trees are. So for her, that element of trees was very important. And then there was Khabat. Khabat was Khabat is Syrian, Lebanese. As she would describe herself, she's like a person who's moved from country to country, but her origins, I think, are Syrian. And Khabat has been in the country for a number of years in Scotland, and she was a journalist in her home countries. And so when she came here, she became a translator. And what she was interested in was the power of words. So she wrote a poem. She wrote it in English, but we did ask her, when she was like reciting the poem, because there was a couple of lines at the end of the poem, and she would say them in Arabic, and they just seemed to be much more powerful when she said it in Arabic, because Arabic is her first language. So when she was reciting them in English, it wasn't as impactful. But as soon as she starts to speak in Arabic, you can feel the passion behind her words. And this is the difference between people using their first language and the second language. Okay, so that's Khabat, and you can tell that I'm really passionate about all these women. I love them all to bits. I'm just amazed by their talents and about their stories, their personal journeys, and just watch them grow and flourish. And it's just like, yeah. And I've learned so much from each and every one of them. So that's Khabat, and then we've got Monica. Right, so Monica was from India, and Monica had been in the country for a few years. Monica has been educated in English in India, has got many degrees, very intelligent person in terms of like academically, really has achieved a lot in her academic careers. And Monica was always, she said she was, again, she didn't know a lot about climate change or environmental sustainability. And that's why she went on the climate leadership program. And she was really interested to learn more. And she's an IT type of person, she's a person who's IT. So it's like, it never really crosses, the two don't really cross or verge for her, right? Or you would think that. So, but Monica showed us how they do. So Monica created a game. So she created this it's going to become like more of a virtual reality simulator game. But at the point when she was showing it at COP26, it was just a computer game. So it's called an escape room game. So you have to answer questions so that you can get to the next level. So yes, so that was really amazing what Monica was able to do. And she used it with her children. So it was really important for her that her children were involved in the game. So, and it was accessible to young people, and it was fun for young people as well as herself, as well as her having fun and us having fun with the game. So that was a game. Monica keeps on developing the game, and she wants it to be more of a virtual reality game now as well. So where you have the headset thing going on with the game. So that's Monica, and she's still working on the game as well. But she has a full-time job in IT. Her other life, as she calls it. But Monica is the head of sustainability at her organisation now, which is really great. So she brings in sustainability to her workplace. And then we have Nguatjitavi. Nguatjitavi was the person I was telling you about, if you remember that. Throughout the whole of the climate leadership programme, she had a video off, right? And she was very shy. She had just arrived in the country. She was a refugee, asylum seeker. She wasn't very confident with her English. She wasn't a very confident person. And so I was really surprised when she said she wanted to be a climate sister. So I was like thinking, okay, you do know you're going to have to talk to people, be in front of, a camera, or be at COP26. And she was like, yep. And what Nguatjitavi created was, she created a short video, but more about energy efficiency and more about tips on how to save energy. So don't put so much water in the kettle, put your clothes on the line to dry. So all of these tips that she uses in her everyday life, she wanted to share them with somebody else, but in making a video. She was also interested in making a comic, but I think she ended up doing the video, which was what her preference was. But again, in her video, she used some of the climate sisters in her video. So that crossover, that cross-pollination was really interesting. And Nguatjitavi is now so much more confident. I mean, you see her outside, she's like a supermodel. She likes to pose, she likes to be in front of a camera now. Totally opposite of the Nguatjitavi that I used to know, right? Then there was Farah. Farah was from Afghanistan, Iran. And again, she'd only been in the country a couple of years at the time when she went on the climate leadership course, which led to the Climate Sisters. And Farah was also interested in presenting. So she was somebody who was very confident. and she knew that she wants to be somebody who wants to be behind the camera and wants to present. And she went on the climate leadership course because she was more interested in the leadership side rather than in environmental sustainability. But when she came on the course, she became more interested in environmental sustainability. But what she noticed herself was living in Glasgow, living in Govan, which is like quite a deprived area, is the amount of like e-waste and white goods waste that people just dump, right? And the council don't recycle, don't upcycle. And she was saying that in the country where she lives, it's like things like that are recycled and recycled and recycled and fixed and repaired, and you just don't throw things away, you know, both for economic reasons, but also you would never just throw it out on your street, you know, it's just not heard of, not seen of, but yet we're dumping so much stuff here, and she just couldn't get over that. So she took photographs. So she created like a whole photo collage, and so she created photos. Farah is now working in, she works with refugees and asylum seekers, and she is also part of another project of mine, which is a food story project, and that's connecting food recipes with culture and climate change and sustainability. So Farah's part of that project now as well. So the Climate Sisters then was supposed to be a one-off project for COP26, right? And it was just about me providing a platform for these women to have their voices in a way that they wanted to showcase their voice. So it wasn't about me saying that come up and present, or, you know, here's a platform and I want you to speak. It was very much, well, they decided that this is their voice through their creative artwork, and that had to be showcased. But what was interesting was that how this project has grown arms and legs. It did attract a lot of attention, and to the point where Women's Environmental Network, who also showcased this project in London as well. So Women's Environmental Network have now taken on the Climate Sisters and are trying to replicate it in London and then hopefully in other cities as well. So, which is great. And then what we're going to try to do is keep the connection between the Glasgow Climate Sisters, so now they're going to be labelled as Glasgow Climate Sisters, is so that they become mentors for the other Climate Sisters. So that's always going to be this connection. And also, like I said, like I'm working on another project, which is the Food Stories book, and wherever possible, I'm always trying to bring in the Glasgow Climate Sisters, either to join another project or to become a mentor in some way. So what was interesting for me about the Climate Sisters was the cross-pollination of ideas, knowledge, learning from each other was really interesting. But as I said, that what was also was good was the fact that in each of the projects, the women tried to use each other and like use each other in their own projects as well. And that was very much about collaboration. Because I remember at the start of the project, somebody said, oh, is there going to be a competition for the best project, the best idea? And I said, no, because I'm creating a space for all of you to have your voices at COP26. And this is not about competition. And that non-competitiveness was really a lovely space to be in for each of the women and for myself, that nobody's competing against each other. We're all working together. We're all supporting each other. And this for me was very much of a decolonized way of working, and also like a non-capitalistic way of working as well. So it was like these elements that we were actually taken away from the way that we've been taught in society that we need to function. So it was very much about we're a collective, we're working together, but we're here to give each of us a voice and a space. So it's not all of us being one. So we're not one organization. We're 12 individuals, but we've all got something important to say, but we're all supporting each other. And that really, really came out. And because even now, each of the women are still connected to each other and still support each other, even though they're totally independent.
You mentioned the topic of food quite a few times. I wonder if you run any projects or programs related to food and how it may relate to sustainability.
Yeah. So, at the moment, I'm working with Al Bayt Society on a project called Food Stories. And Food Stories came about because when I was here, we were doing some cooking classes. And when I say cooking classes, I don't mean that the women were learning to cook, because that's always this, the women were like, we don't need to be taught to cook, we know how to cook, right? But we just came together around food. and we called them loosely cooking classes, but it was cooking sessions, I suppose. And this was during the pandemic, and the woman was saying that, you know, we've got all these recipes from our culture and we'd love to share them with other people. And so we thought, right, okay, why don't we do a cookbook, you know, a recipe book? But then what came from that recipe book, it started to develop that the idea that actually it's much more than just a recipe book. It's actually a food story book, because the women, when they were talking about their home countries, they were also telling me about the impacts of climate change. Like I said, you know, people were talking about Iraq and how Iraq was now sitting at 55 degrees in the summer, and it was just like so hot. So it was like, well, how do we connect their recipes with their food stories in terms of connecting it to their culture and connecting it to sustainability? So again, there's about 10 women that are involved in this project, 10 women from different parts of the Middle East. Each person has brought their recipe, and then with that recipe to talk about the food that they're using, the ingredients that they use, where those ingredients come from, how those ingredients are being impacted by climate change, you know, or how are they adapting recipes to fit into a different culture with different locally sourced ingredients, or how they're using leftover food to create new recipes. So each of the women have brought their own recipes to this book, and then they tell a story about their own personal story, which is really important for me, because it's also connecting on that personal level, because some people have moved from like Afghanistan to Iran to the UK, and then it's like, well, how has that changed your food culture in a way, the food that you eat, how has that changed? Or how do you connect, or how do you hold on to it? So for instance, one girl that I was speaking to is a student here, and she's from Algeria, and she said, it's really important for me to highlight Algerian food because I want to show people my culture, because nobody goes to Algeria, because we don't have tourism in Algeria. And then it made me think, actually, most of the women that I was working to, people don't go to their countries. So like Iran, Iraq, you know, these countries have had sanctions, or Pakistan, where there's, you know, people think there's terrorists, and so they're not safe to go to, for, you know, or perceived not to be safe to go to. Lebanon. So all of these countries, so people had their stories, but then it was always connected to sustainability in terms of like some people bring back food that they only grow in a certain season in Lebanon. So somebody was talking to me about these green leaves that they have in Lebanon, and she packs them and freezes them and then brings them over from Lebanon, you know, dry freezes them and brings them over, because you only get them at a certain season and you only eat them in Lebanon at a certain time. But then she misses them here, and it reminds her of home. And yeah, so she's going now. She's actually just on a flight to Lebanon right now, this lady that I'm talking about, and she's out there picking these green leaves as we speak, probably getting them ready to be brought back. But yeah, and again, it's about that connection to land, knowing where their food comes from, all coming out in these food stories. So we're creating this book. The interesting thing is, because I'm doing this with the University of Glasgow, and there's a researcher that we've been talking to, and the researcher's like, she's working with me to do the interviews for each of the women, then we're putting the stories together. And she said one thing she was really struggling with was, she's going like, I don't know, you know, when she goes, the people are telling me the recipes, but they're not telling me the amounts that they're putting in. And I goes, well, and she goes, but this is going to be like a cookbook and a recipe, so we need to know the amounts. And I'm like, well, do we? Actually, because these are the things that we've tried to change. Why, if the women aren't using measured amounts when they're cooking, and if they're just saying, right, okay, I'm going to put a bit of salt in, or I'm putting, you know, I'm going to have a look to see how much more oil I need in, I'm putting a bit more oil in. Well, that's the way they cook. So let's be authentic to their cooking, because if we actually then trying to translate that to like measuring it, we're taking away how they cook, because they use their senses when they're cooking. They're using their eyes. They're saying like, I'll wait until I see there's no water left. And that's really important to cooking, right? Or they smell it and say, oh, I can smell the spices now. Okay, or just before it starts to burn, I can just smell that it's burning. So just at that stage, you know. So there was these like little cues that were really important for the way these women were cooking. I wanted to be authentic to the way that they cook, because these are recipes that were passed down by their moms to them, or their grandparents. So there's this real connection, this emotional connection to that food as well. So the food isn't just about, eating to sustain yourself or eating for nutrition, but it's actually more about love and connection. So why are we then taking that away by saying that everything needs to be measured? So let's be authentic is what I was saying to then Mariana, who's like my co-researcher on this project. And she said, but how are people going to replicate them? How are they going to replicate? Because the women want to share their recipes with other people. So how are other people going to cook? I got the same way that they learned to cook. They didn't learn to cook by measuring things. So, and again, it's all relative because, again, it's like the size of a tomato. And one of the things that came up really again and again was when we were like collecting the food stories and the recipes, people would say a medium onion. Now, a medium onion is totally relative because what I think is a medium onion, somebody else might think that's a giant onion, right? What somebody else might think is a medium onion, I might think, oh my God, that's an absolutely tiny onion, So it's all relative. So, again, so it's that relativity. You have to remember what people, make that terms of reference to. So, wanted to really be authentic. But then it made me think, well, actually, if we do it in terms of like measuring it in terms of ounces and pounds and spoonfuls and 5 minutes for this and 3 minutes for this, that's actually the way of the colonizers, and that's not the real authentic way of where these people come from. Like people like myself, we don't cook like that. I don't cook like that. I wasn't taught to cook like that. And if I'm passing on a recipe, I find it really difficult to translate it into measured quantities. And especially if I'm trying to cook and replicate what my mum has taught me. And even my kids sometimes turn around and say to me, make something that Nanny made, because my mum's not here. And so I'm the eldest. I learned to cook from my mum. And everybody in my family will come to me when they feel sad and they want something that reminds them of my mum, their grandmother, or my brother or my sister. Even my sister's a brilliant cook, but when she feels like she misses mum, she'll say to me, make this dish because you make it like mum makes it, And again, so you want to have that authenticity and that love, and that doesn't come from, from being measured in a way. You can't put a quantity on the love that you put into your dish. I suppose we could start saying that add 2 spoonfuls of tears and 2 spoonfuls of laughter. It would be nice, wouldn't it? But yeah, so we have changed it now. So very much so we've changed it from being like called a cookbook to like a food storybook. So we're trying to make sure that people don't have this expectation that there's going to be recipes that are going to be measured recipes, but they are recipes, authentic recipes that will be able to be followed. But we are having this like thread throughout the whole book about connecting to culture, connecting to land, and connecting to environmental sustainability and what that means for each of these women, because it means different things. For some people, it's very much about like using leftover food. And for some people, it's about having local grown food. And for some people, it's about eating less meat, whatever it is. But for each of them, it's different.
Zarina, you often mention connection to land. How do you connect people to nature and to outdoors through your programs?
A lot of the activities that we do, like the Climate Leadership, Climate Sisters project, it's a lot of the times, it's like we'll do even simple things like picnics. Like go out for a picnic, so it's like bringing the food to the outdoors. Or we've been foraging, so people have been foraging, take out groups to foraging. For me, it's very important that people are connected to nature and connected to the outdoors, because if they're not connected to that and they have this continuous disconnect, it's like they're removed from it, and there's like then we have this idea of being superior to the land. So that's one element. The other element from working with people from different diverse communities was that being connected to the land also gives them connection to identity and belonging. And where people, because I was hearing stories that people, when, like I said earlier on about this lady saying she was from Iraq and she was like, using her hands to describe being connected to the soil. And I remember my mum being very much like that, very much like being connected to the land, the actual physical land, right? And yet, I never felt that being here in Scotland, and I'm a very outdoors person, and I used to think, okay, so then I thought, well, being in a city is never going to connect people. So all the projects I work with, there's always some element of going outdoors and being connected to the outdoor, doing outdoor activities, whether it's a walk, whether it's foraging, whether it's doing some conservation work. So I've taken up a group who've been cutting down rhododendrons. Now that's another story about rhododendrons, because the narrative that was given by the park rangers about rhododendrons was that they're an invasive species. They were brought over to this country and now we don't need them, and they become invasive and taking over. And I'm sitting there thinking, we're talking to people that are asylum seekers and refugees who have come over to this country, and they've heard this narrative in terms of humans, and now you're telling the same narratives in terms of plant life, and just didn't feel quite comfortable. But yeah, so there is some elements of issues and problematic narratives that can happen even with plant invasion. But I've done a lot, because I used to work for a race equality organisation, and I worked within the environmental sector. I did a lot with Scottish Wildlife Trust, Nature Scotland, and Loch Lomond and Trossachs Park, the country ranges. So with a lot of these outdoors environmental organisations, in terms of thinking about their equalities and diversity. But for me, it wasn't just equalities and diversity. It's about how do we collaborate and create projects and programs that are meaningful to people. So what do people get out of going out to the outdoors? How do they feel inclusive? How do they feel that this is the place that they belong to is really important. So even something simple like, I remember the project here at Albeit, a group of women had never been strawberry picking, So we went to a farm. So we didn't go to one of these just commercial strawberry picking places. We actually went to a farm, and we did some strawberry picking, some gooseberry picking, some cherries, and they had the time of their life there, because they've never experienced that here being in the UK. But yet it reminded them of back home, which is something that they didn't realise that they could have here. And I remember taking another group, and we just went bramble picking. So brambles are like raspberries, like little raspberries, but they're wild. And they see them, and again, it's very seasonal. And they're like, are we allowed to eat these? It was like, and I'm like, yes, they're there for anybody to eat. Yes, we can eat them. And now it's like taking them and picking them, and they're like, Zarina, what are you doing? I'm like, you're allowed to eat them, So yes, and I've done that with especially young children that are like young refugees coming over. And another story is about a Somalian group that I took over to Loch Lomond and Trossachs Park. I take them to Loch Lomond and Trossachs Park a lot because it's very close to Glasgow. It's a 20-minute drive from Glasgow. We have a very good relationship with the park ranger there, and they're very accommodating for new groups. So that's one of the reasons why I keep mentioning Loch Lomond and Trossachs Park. It's a beautiful loch near Glasgow, got lots of lovely wildlife around it, and lots of accessible paths and walks. But I took a group of young Somalian children to Loch Lomond, and they'd never seen the water at sea before. And it was the first time that they'd been on a little boat, because there was a little ferry boat that took you to an island, and so they were on this island, so they had to go on the ferry boat, but had to go across the water, and for them that was a novelty, and they just couldn't get over the fact that they were beside the sea and the water, and it wasn't the loch, but to them it felt like the sea, and there was it was and they were screaming and they were shouting, but it was all out of joy. So it was so fun for them. But it was just really, because I wasn't used to that much excitement, and I was like, oh, you need to tell them to calm down. But but I didn't want to dampen their enjoyment. But they had so much fun, and they didn't even have a change of clothes. But all the children were soaking wet, but they were so happy. But then to me that was like, these children are going to have these fond memories now, so without the help of people that make these things happen, these children would never have experienced that, or they would have ended up always living in the city of Glasgow, not seeing anything else apart from local parks, but not actually appreciating that there's more to Scotland. And then that helps them with feeling a sense of identity, belonging, but with that comes that citizenship. And that being a responsible citizen, being able to be involved in debates or consultations at a different level, at that community level, but also at that strategic level. So when there's a community consultation, then they've got something to say, so they can be involved. So when there's policy changes or policy consultations, then at least they feel more informed and feel as if they have a place to say something. Because I remember when I was speaking to some of the climate sisters, and they were saying some of the things that they were saying to me about, it's fine for you, Zarina. This is the area that you work in, and you've got a voice, but we don't have voices. And the reasons why they don't have voices, for instance, Khabat said, well, she was an asylum seeking refugee. If she raises her voice in any way, she's scared she's going to get thrown out of the country. Right, there was Saj, who was grown up here, but she grew up in a time when this country was very racist, and she was always told that keep your head down, don't rock the boat, don't say anything, don't bring attention to yourself. So it's these additional factors that play in people's lives that actually stop them from participating in civil society. And for me, if you stop that, and those are the real barriers. You were asking earlier on, what are the barriers? I think those are the real barriers in life, where people aren't able to take part in civil society, in civil discussions and debates and consultation, and then get their voices heard at that policy level.
Zarina, do you have projects that specifically try to empower people to participate in local governance and policy change?
Yeah, because that's very important to the work that I do, is because I worked with Scottish Government a lot on climate change and sustainability, and this lack of diversity and lack of representation at that policy level. And it would usually used to just be my voice there, and it was just like, I can't represent all the different ethnic groups in Scotland. It was just like this assumption that Zarina represents every different ethnicity, and I'm trying to say there's diversity within diversity, right? But yeah, so part of everything that I do and all the projects that I do, there is this whole element, like the climate sisters, is get them to be empowered, whoever wants to be empowered in that point, that where they can step into that space, where they are involved in local governance, in policy making, in decision making, because we need to have more representation. In this country, we are lucky that there are democratic processes that allow that to happen. So why not? Why shouldn't we take those spaces? So this project in London at the moment that I'm working on which is called the Just Fact Project or program, and the FACT stands for Food and Climate Transition. So it's empowering the local borough of London, a whole borough of London, to think about, well, what would a local food system look like? And then transforming that food system. And we're doing that by providing resources and funding for small local projects, food projects, whether it's a growing project, whether it's an urban farm, whether it's a food production place, whether it's getting rid of plastic, whatever it is, whatever those local issues are. But how do we bring them together so that the whole borough becomes an area where there's been a transformation in their food system? And in part of that, we have stakeholders and steering groups, which are people from the council, from local government, from national government involved in that. But then part of that is, again, making sure that these spaces are accessible for all and everybody's voices are valued and heard. So it's making sure that the right places are created, safe spaces are created, and that people do feel that their voices have a meaning. Because it's very easy, especially for a woman of colour, for her voice to be invisibilised. And it's really odd, that I use the term becoming invisible, because I think I'm a woman of colour. I can walk into a room of white people, and yet I become invisible. And yet physically I am so obvious there, and that happens to so many of us. So I think a project like the one in London in the Tower Hamlets, which is a very diverse area, is such an important project. And it's a collaboration with Women's Environmental Network, Platform, and a number of small organisations.
What approaches do you use to empower women of color and other community members to participate in policy making and governance?
I think for me is finding safe spaces for them. What I mean by safe spaces, because it's a term that's used in different ways, but safe space is where they don't feel undermined or undervalued. So, and that sometimes means creating spaces where people are in smaller rooms, smaller spaces. So it's more one-to-one spaces, or they feel less intimidated. So if you're having a conversation with somebody like a local councillor, so rather than going to hear a local councillor speak, it's inviting the local councillor to say, can you come and speak to this group of women? You know, so it's changing that dynamic as well. So it's like they're your guests now. You know, you're not there to listen to somebody, they're there to listen to you and speak to you on a much more one-to-one level. So just for instance, like me and you are talking, so it's much more on a, I want to say like more of a human level. It's not that the other way is not human, but it's much more on an interpersonal level. That's the word I'm looking for, on that interpersonal level. So creating those kind of safe, which is what I call a safe space for a lot of women of colour, because it feels a lot more less intimidating, much more accessible. The other thing is resources, right? So if I'm working with organisations and you want organisations to do something, you have to resource them well. A lot of the organisations that I work with are very voluntary-led organisations that have very limited resources. When I say resources, it's not just financial resources. It can be access to event space, or it could be access to, you know, digital equipment. It could be lots of different things that just actually prevent them from doing things that they'd like to do, or doing things how they would want to do. So it's giving them the tools that they also need. And whether that's resources or whether that's money, financial help and financial support, but making sure people are well resourced to do things. Time, the concept of time is a huge thing, right? So working with people from different countries and different nationalities, different cultures, you learn that time means different things to different places, right? So time has to be much more of a fluid concept, and I think having that understanding and having that flexibility is really important, and it's something that a lot of people don't think of as a barrier, but time is a huge thing. You know, I know that I've worked with many people from from the African continent, from different African countries, and like a minute can mean like 2 hours. Right, so literally a minute for them is like 2 hours. They have a totally different idea of concepts. So you arrange to meet somebody at 10 o'clock, don't expect them at 10 o'clock. They're going to be there at 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock, right? So yeah, so be fluid with time, I think is really important. So having that idea that, okay, if someone says it's going to take you 10 minutes, it might take them half an hour. And that just might be because they need longer time to process things or whatever, or they've got other things that are going on, or they want to be hospitable as well. So with hospitality, again, takes time. And that's another key thing as well. It's about considering, what does hospitality mean? So for many people women of colour, that if you're having a meeting or you're having a gathering, you can't do it without food. So again, I'm bringing food into it again, and this is really important. So bringing people together, you have to bring them together around food, and that sharing of food is important. So it's not just about, you know, a plate of biscuits. It's about, well, what did you make, or what did I, you know, what can I make, or how can I help you? So it's also, it's not just about like having the financial resources for the food, but there's space for people to be hospitable. They want to be hospitable, so giving them that space to be hospitable, to be sharing. And some might not have the capacity to do that, but again, it's just being conscious, careful, considerate as well. And it's that interpersonal link, and even at that political level, we don't have to have people on their golden thrones. They can just be sitting on the floor with everybody else, right? And that's the kind of spaces that I try to create, that there is no hierarchy. You know, one day you could be on that throne, but one day you might not be on that throne. So why are we treating you any different? So it's creating that equal footing space, and then that makes people feel a lot more confident that they can speak. Stripping away jargon as well. So stripping away all those jargons and all the terminology that academics and policymakers use, stripping that all away and just get to the point is really important. And let people speak, and let people speak from the heart, and let people talk emotionally. That's the other thing I don't understand, is why is policy so devoid of emotion, yet all the decisions that we make in our lives are based on how we feel about things. Yet we take away emotion from policy making. So allow people to be emotional, let people make emotional decisions, because that's, in real life, that's how people decide. Yeah, so those are the things that I would probably say, which is probably not what people expect when you think about barriers, but those are some of the ways that I try to make accessible spaces, to make things that are normal in our everyday life, but also they're normal and replicable in spaces that you would not think it would be suitable.
Would you tell us about your PhD, and is it connected to sustainability or justice topics?
Right, so I'll explain now. Because do you think I'm going to do a PhD that's not connected to any of this? It's totally connected, and the reason why I'm doing my PhD is because of all this reason. So I decided to do a PhD not because I wanted to have the doctor name title behind me, or I want to become a professorship. No. It was because there was this huge gap in research. Right, and I was coming across that when I was doing all this work with all these communities, there was no credible research done on it. And people keep coming back to me and saying, Zarina, can you tell me about BME communities doing this? Or what do BME communities do? BME communities don't engage in outdoor activities, or they're not interested in climate change, and all of these things. And I'm thinking, but I've been working with communities for over like 10, 12 years, and they are all so passionate about the work they do. So where is all of that information? It wasn't there. Now, thankfully, more and more people in the academic space, and there are more researchers that are actually looking at providing that data set and providing that knowledge base. So that's why I'm doing my PhD, because of that reason. That's where it started from. And I chose food sustainability. So I'm looking at food, which is like, I'm connecting food, culture and sustainability in my PhD. It's looking at what are the food practices of Pakistani heritage women in the UK, and how do they affirm or unsettle the main environmental narratives, and the reason why I'm looking at Pakistani heritage women in the UK is to also, I question my own identity of like, how Pakistani am I, but yet I tick the British Pakistani box. So that made me question my own identity, but then again, it's to show that there's heterogeneity within the Pakistani community. So being Pakistani heritage can mean different things to different women from the same kind of cultural background. And it's like, how Pakistani are you, or how British are you, and how is that then connected to your food? And do you hold on to your culture through your food, which is what I do, you see. So I don't see myself as Pakistani many of the time, but my food culture is totally Pakistani, and that's been inherited and passed down through like my Pakistani ancestrals. So yes, then again, it's like, well, what are the existing knowledges that are held within community, which is really important for me, because it's saying, rather than taking a top-down approach and policymakers telling us what to do, well, why don't we flip it and see, well, what knowledge is there existing in communities? What do they already do? What's been passed down through their culture? What's been passed down through their religion, or, you know, that they hold on to because of their religious beliefs? Or what have their parents taught them that they do that are pro-environmental behaviours? And that's what I'm trying to pull out in my PhD, to say there is existing knowledge. We just have to value it and bring it to the forefront.
So Zarina, kind of going back to the larger picture, why do you do what you do, and what ultimate impacts would you like to make on communities?
Wow, such a big question. Why do I do what I do? I don't have an end goal. So I always say this to everybody, because everybody says, oh, well, what do you want? What career do you want? I don't really see myself as having any particular career or purpose in life. All I want to do is, I'm probably like a farmer, right? I like to plant seeds, and I love to watch seeds grow, and just then they can go off and do their own thing. And so I like that nurturing bit. I like to nurture. I have a lot of ideas. I like to nurture and help people nurture their ideas as well. But it's basically, fundamentally, always about creating a fairer, just world. So a world for everybody to feel that they're valued on this planet. They have equal and equitable place in this planet, but also that we live in harmony with the planet. And I think that was something that from a very young age that I was taught, that we are one in the planet. And I think, I'm not very religious, but I remember in Islam, the thing that always stuck out to me was the the ethos, because it's not even a sentence, it's not a verse, but it's the ethos that we are all one on this planet. We are all equal on this planet. Nobody is better than anybody else. So for me, seeing all the injustices in this world is fundamentally wrong. Why is some people better? Why do some people think that they're better than other people just based on their race, their gender, their ability? So for me, it's like we should acknowledge that people are different, but they all have a fair space in this land. And again, this land doesn't belong to anybody. You know, it's everybody's to look after and care for. So for me, this is like deep inside me that this is how I feel, and this is what drives me. If you're asking me this now, this is like, yeah, something that's very much is what drives me all the time, because I just feel as if we exploit the planet. And why are we exploiting this land that is there for us to look after, is giving us life, is a thing that sustains us, but yet we're just take, and we're not giving back. And we need to give back to the planet, look after it and care for it, and everything on that planet, whether it's plant life, animal life and human life. But we all need to live together. We're one ecosystem, and I don't know how the hell we got here, where we got all these layers of hierarchy. We've got systems that just take, we've got systems that just destroy, we've got systems that just don't care. And I think it's that caring element that I just want to show people that I care, and that they have caring inside them, but how do we bring that out of all of us? So now we're in the park, we're in this lovely beautiful garden. We've got a sunny day in Glasgow, which is very rare, but we're here today with some of the women from the Climate Sisters who are sitting enjoying a picnic, and we're also here with some of the women from the Food Stories. And one of the Climate Sisters is right here with me. This is Monica, so I'd like to introduce Monica. Monica was the wonderful person behind the escape room game that I was telling you about. So she created this fantastic game, and it was a journey about understanding climate change and sustainability. And I'll let Monica say a bit more about the game. Monica, can you tell us a bit more about the game that you did?
Thank you, Zarina. So my game was about, it was targeted to be played by a family so that they understand the concepts of climate change, its effects, and put all the effects and the solutions of that effects into practice in their day-to-day life. So this game is very family-friendly game. It's made up of very basic software tools, and I got a really good feedback on that game from my own son, who was a tester for that game, I would say.
Always the best critic, so
yeah, he was. Right. So my aim is to make this game a little bit more professional, using a better tools, and then run it in primary schools across Glasgow. Right.
Right. So what I really wanted to ask you was that, Monica, you participated so much in the Climate Sisters, and you know it was invaluable, the insights that you brought through your game. But what I'd like to know is, like, how have you used the knowledge, the experience that you gained from being part of the Climate Sisters in your work, because you work in a totally different field. And so how have you transferred those skills into the work that you do?
Right. So when I learned about this private climate change course, and when I started gaining a lot of information about it, it gained a lot of interest in that field. So I started to read about it more. And when I learned that in my office there was this group called Sustainability Group, which works on the guidelines which is from the Scottish government. So I joined that group. I'm volunteering currently in that group, and I'm actively participating in whatever events they are hosting and giving them ideas.
So where do you work? So can you just give us a little bit of content about, like, what kind of work do you do?
Because so I work as a senior data engineer with National Records of Scotland. It's a non-ministerial department of Scottish government, and they have this sustainability group within. So we meet like once in a month on Teams, Microsoft Teams.
And you're the lead person. You've been very humble here.
I'm one of the volunteers, I would say.
Yeah. So which is great. So you're bringing that into your workforce now,
yeah,
and you're implementing a lot of changes within the organization.
Yes, I'm trying to look for opportunities where I can apply the knowledge and skills and my interests and passions, whatever I've gained.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So now I'd like to introduce Maratab. Maratab has been working on the food storybook. So she's been sharing her recipe, her journey, about what her food culture is. So Maratib, why was it important to you that you told your story about food and your culture? Why is that important to you?
I like to show people, different people, our traditional food, Iraqi food. I like to introduce my culture. Yeah.
And how long have you been here?
Long time ago, 27 years ago.
And do you pass on your food culture to your children? Do they learn?
Yes, yes. My daughter Mariam,
Uh-huh.
they like to know about my culture, and always they ask me, we have to go to see Iraq.
Right.
I'm going to Iraq every year, once a year.
And do they have Iraqi food at home?
Yes.
And do you teach them how to cook?
Yeah, but they don't like to learn, you know. New generation.
But they like to eat.
Yeah, they like.
Good.
Yeah, they like
Right.
to eat. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Miriam. So
Hello.
you're Maratib's daughter.
Yes.
Right. Can I ask you, how do you feel about your mum taking part in this food stories book?
Really good, because she's never done anything like this before. So out her comfort zone.
Is she out of comfort zone?
Yeah, she would never have done this before. So with your motivation and like with her sister as well, it's so good. It's nice for them to do something different.
All right. And when you say something different, what do you mean by something different? Because you were there when we
Yeah.
interviewed her, and so we were connecting the stories about her journey, but also to climate change.
Yeah.
So when you say something different, what does that look like for her and you?
For her, it's something different because she's got the same routine basically every day. You know, like Middle Eastern mums, they have the same routine every day, looking after the house, don't really go out their comfort zone, don't really do anything, especially my mum doesn't really do anything like adventurous. So to see her participate in something like that was like really good to see, because she really enjoyed it.
Uh-huh.
So I was like, see mum, like once you try something that you might not be comfortable with at the start, but you really like it, you'll be more confident to do these things more in the future.
Thank you, because it was really nice to see you encouraging her, and I thought that was
Yeah.
lovely when you were encouraging her to talk and be part of it. So that's
because
really
she's
nice.
she gets worried thinking her English isn't great, but it's really good, but she just didn't have that confidence to put herself out there.
And I also saw like you being quite proud of
Yeah.
her and being able to pass down her knowledge to other people.
Yeah, it's lovely, it's good to see, because she's got a lot of knowledge and experience and culture to share, but she's not really had the opportunity to share it before. So
Brilliant.
it was good to see, and with my auntie as well. She's the same as my mum, so.
Oh, thank you. Thanks a
No
lot,
worries.
Miriam. So now I'm going to introduce Nahawand. Nahawand was also a Climate Sisters. Nahawand created the statue, the wonderful statue with upcycled and recycled materials. Since the project, since the Climate Sisters, we spoke a lot during the Climate Sisters about climate change. You participated in COP26.
Mm-hmm.
Do you talk about climate change or deforestation or any other issues, environmental issues, to your friends, your family, or anywhere else?
Yeah. Actually, when we end this project with Zarina, it's not end to me, because I create many projects for me, like sustainability, like remade, reuse, because in original I'm a jeweler. And at the same time, I'm dealing with the issue, climate issue from a long time. And when Zarina told me about this project, it was a challenge to do this giant sculpture, and I'm not a sculptor at all, but it was a challenge to give a message. And this message, for me, I would like to this message to be continuous. Okay, not to stop in somewhere. So that's why with my stall, in every market I have, I talk to people, to the customer about my project. I have a project to zero waste, continue with the deforestation project with my jewelry. I just picked stuff from nature and decorate them with unused jewelry. Okay, and I've been managed to sell. Remember in London to sell some stuff. Okay, and people like it very much, especially people who cares about the climate change issues. I challenge myself to not stop, to continue with this stuff. Okay, especially I have another part to give a life to the very old-fashioned jewelry, and take it as a part from sustainability and recycle to give them a life again in modern and contemporary vision, to sell it again, give it again. So I have many parts of my stalls, every part talking about climate change in somewhere. Okay, and that's it. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. So thank you. No, well done.
Thank you, Zarina.
And now we've got Farah here with us. So Farah was very concerned about e-waste and white goods waste in the UK, and you did a lot of photography on it. Right, so that was a project you did. But Farah, I'm really interested in knowing, what was it that you enjoyed about Climate Sisters? What brought you joy? What brought you hope?
Back in the 2019, yeah?
2019?
Yeah, 2019.
2020?
2020, yeah. I took a part in a climate change, leadership climate change. And Zarina was our facilitator. After 6 or 8 weeks, we done the course. I thought I have a passion about climate change, nature. And then after the course, we were enough lucky. We received a good opportunity. Zarina told us, yeah, we are near to COP26, and we nominate from out of like maybe 20 or 23 people, we nominate 13 people from the numbers, and all of us, we had projects for climate at COP26. And I was thinking to start my, to use my photography skills and hobby, and take photos and photos of e-waste, people dumping electronic and goods, white goods on the street. And by my project, remind people about how these their dumping stuff, how affect the climate change. And that was like my favorite things from Climate Sisters memories and things, because the Climate Sisters and my project for COP26 gave me the opportunity to use my skills, my hobby, and my passion, and let the people know about it, and change the world to a better place for people. Yeah.
So you feel that you did your bit to change the world for a better place.
Yeah, I took my steps. Yeah.
Brilliant.
I'm so happy. Whenever I'm thinking about what I did, it gave me a good feeling.
Gives you a good feeling. You did well. You did
it brings a smile on my face.
Oh.
Yeah, when my son read the sentence on the banners, when people, children from schools, they come and see the staff or e-waste on the street. Yeah, they will think about. So don't do it and stop it, or maybe they will tell their parents or families. Like my son tells me, "Mom, don't forget to off the light. Mom, please put this plastic bottle in a different bin." So this makes me happy. I can see the results.
You can see the results. Brilliant.
In my life, yeah.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. And now I'd like you to meet Khabat. Khabat was also one of the Climate Sisters. Khabat did a poem for the Climate Sisters. Khabat, can you just tell me a little bit about the poem and why you did the poem and what that meant to you?
Because I have relative with nature, and I was since my childhood I was writing poem, and I was trying to talking to nature, to the stars. And sometimes my dad was saying, "What are you doing at that night?" I was saying, "I am trying to talk with the stars, just to see how is it wave, how it is movement, or how it touching." And I was every time trying to see who is the nearest from the nature to me. And it happened a good relationship with the sea. Sometimes, yeah. So maybe 10 years I was every day just trying to walk around the sea, trying to see its waves. Some my friends, I was sometimes they saying, "You are creating story or something." I was saying, because the sea is talking. When you like to understand, you have something, you can talk with the sea, and the sea will give you the answers. Oh. So about the poem about the nature, about beautiful words written on my son, saying now it is time, because they are telling about now it is time to understand about the nature, about the climate change. Maybe I said it is needs your signature, my friend, because some people, they were believing that there is no climate change and they weren't believed with this. Maybe during my words, I try to show for others people how can be related to the nature. Example, don't throw glass on the ground, or don't broken on something on the ground. It means we are talking about how to protect our nature.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's really wonderful to hear all that.